It started as a simple palace renovation in 2024. But what workers uncovered shook the monarchy to its core. Behind a sealed wall at Kensington Palace, a forgotten room lay frozen in time since 1997. Inside, among gowns and photographs, was an ornate jewelry box. Not just any box, but one engraved with a chilling message. For those who dare seek truth, DS. When Princess Anne lifted the lid, she expected heirlooms. Instead, she found confessions, codes, and secrets that had been buried since the night Diana's light was stolen. What she read brought her to tears and changed everything. The sealed room inside Kensington. In spring 2024, as renovation crews worked through the quieter eastern wing of Kensington Palace, a discovery stopped everything. Hidden behind an aging wooden panel was a room that hadn't been touched since 1997, the year Princess Diana died. It was small, sealed off, and filled with dust and silence. Furniture sat exactly where it had been left. Dresses hung in place. Shoes remained by the door. But the most unsettling detail? The air. It was still, too still, like someone had frozen time. Buckingham Palace was notified within 3 hours, and by nightfall, Princess Anne had been summoned. She was known for her discretion, discipline, and unwillingness to be swept up in palace theatrics. By 7:42 a.m. the next morning, Anne arrived at the scene dressed in a sharp black coat and leather gloves. She expected old keepsakes, forgotten letters, maybe some press clippings. But instead, something glimmered from the center of the room. An intricately carved rosewood jewelry box, lined with pearl inlays and blue sapphires, partially covered by a silk scarf. Anne lifted the box carefully. It was heavy, heavier than expected. Her fingers found a faint inscription at the base. For those who dare seek truth, DS. Diana Spencer. Not her title, not princess, just her name. Real. Raw. It sent a chill down Anne's spine. She had once seen Diana as over-emotional, too public, too dramatic. But this wasn't drama. This was something else, something intentional. She ordered the box to be transported under full security to Clarence House, directly to her private quarters. By 9:15 a.m., Anne sat alone with the box in her study. Her team had been dismissed. The box rested on a velvet cloth. That inscription wouldn't leave her mind. Seek truth. Anne had spent decades avoiding palace politics, but this felt different. This felt personal. The room at Kensington hadn't been a storage space. It was a message, frozen in time, and Anne now held its key. What began as a relic of grief was now beginning to look like something much more dangerous. Anne hadn't just discovered Diana's past, she had opened the first door to a hidden war. The hidden compartment. The box sat in the center of Anne's desk, bathed in late morning light. Her fingers traced the grooves once more. With a steady breath, she lifted the lid. Inside were emerald earrings, ruby brooches, and a diamond-studded sapphire bracelet, Diana's signature jewels. But even Anne noticed something strange. Etched into the backs were tiny inscriptions. Not initials, not maker's marks, but coded sequences. A ruby piece was marked 002.761ZB. The bracelet read CF-1995-146. Another piece had GPS coordinates engraved under the clasp. Anne narrowed her eyes. These weren't decorative. These were clues. She retrieved a magnifying glass. Her instincts from decades of quiet royal service kicked in. She flipped the box over, tapping the bottom panel. Her thumb pressed on a slightly raised corner. A soft click. something shifted. She froze. A hidden compartment revealed itself. Inside, 5 aged letters tied with a blue ribbon. The top envelope read in Diana's familiar script, "To Anne, please read if I am gone." Also inside the compartment were photographs. Grainy, time-stamped. Diana in disguise, scarf, sunglasses, meeting unfamiliar people. Cafes, parking garages, unmarked doorways. This wasn't public life. These were private meetings. Surveillance? Investigation? Tucked under the photos was a silver key. The tag read, Zurich Deposit Box 837L. Anne's breath caught. Why Switzerland? Why a bank vault? She opened the first letter. It was dated August 28, 1997, 3 days before Diana's death in Paris. The handwriting was rushed, pages stained. The first line stopped Anne cold. If you're reading this, they succeeded in silencing me. The words weren't poetic. They were a warning. This wasn't just a goodbye. It was evidence. By 11:06 a.m., Anne had locked the items in a secure file. But her mind was already spinning. This wasn't inheritance. This was something closer to espionage. Diana hadn't left behind memories. She had left behind secrets. What Anne had just uncovered wasn't just hidden. It was protected. Like a trap door meant for only one person to find. And she wasn't ready for what came next. Sienna's final confession. The second letter in Diana's hand was longer, more detailed. Anne unfolded it carefully. It was dated August 25, 1997, 4 days before her crash in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. Diana described a single night in 1995, during a charity gala, where she first realized something was wrong. A large children's foundation had failed to report overseas funds. When she asked questions, she received evasive answers and then thinly veiled threats. Attached was a sheet of numbers, handwritten bank transfers, dates, recipient initials. Diana had traced donations meant for landmine victims, children's hospitals, and women's shelters that were diverted into personal accounts. Some belonged to business tycoons. Others, shockingly, were tied to royal staffers. Diana's words turned colder. They are using our names to fund things I can't even repeat here. She began working in secret with journalists, one in Switzerland, another in France. They exchanged code names. She used back entrances, changed phones weekly. Diana wasn't imagining danger. She was documenting it. She recorded conversations, stored copies, kept maps and contact names. Anne's hands trembled as she read, I am not afraid to die. I am afraid for William and Harry. If this dies with me, they inherit a lie. By the 4th page, Anne's skepticism had shattered. This wasn't drama. This was investigation. Diana's voice, once dismissed, now rang with strategic precision. She had tracked this rot within the monarchy, not out of vengeance, but to protect her sons. At the bottom of the letter, underlined twice, was a sentence that hit Anne like thunder. The final proof is in the Zurich vault. If anything happens to me, go there first. Anne put down the letter and looked at the silver key. 837L Zurich. The meaning was clear. Diana hadn't left behind gossip. She'd left behind a plan. The truth was no longer a whisper. It had a date, a name, and a location. And if Anne didn't act soon, someone else might reach it first. The Swiss Connection. By September 2024, Anne could no longer ignore the small silver key tagged Zurich Deposit Box 837L. Arrangements were made quietly under the guise of a short charity inspection. On September 12th at 6:14 a.m., her plane touched down in Zurich. Only 2 members of her personal security knew the truth. Even the press thought she was attending a farming symposium in Geneva. But in her coat pocket rested the key that could unravel decades of silence. The Swiss bank was one of the oldest in Europe, built in 1832 and known for its absolute discretion. Anne presented the tag at the counter. No royal name, no crest, just a number. After several layers of clearance, she was escorted into a secure vault chamber. The air was cold, the walls lined with metal boxes stretching to the ceiling. Finally, Box 837L was placed before her on the steel table. Anne's hands trembled slightly as she turned the key. Inside were 3 thick folders of documents, envelopes labeled in Diana's looping script, and a bundle of cassette tapes wrapped in tissue. The files contained international transfer slips, accounts linked to Liechtenstein, Panama, and the Cayman Islands. Millions meant for charities had been siphoned elsewhere. Attached notes identified businessmen, ministers, and even a royal staffer by name. It was more than a suspicion. It was proof. Anne flipped through, her eyes freezing on one page. Operation Marionette. Ensure containment before Paris trip. The date, August 1997. She pressed play on one cassette using the bank's viewing equipment. Diana's face appeared on the small screen. No makeup, no lights. Just a quiet flat and her voice. If you are watching this, I am gone. But I need you to know who profited from the suffering of children. She named names. Not all were foreign. Some were British, tied to foundations that still existed. Her voice cracked only once, when speaking of William and Harry. They cannot inherit this shadow. Please, whoever finds this, tell them the truth. Anne sat motionless for nearly an hour. When she left the bank at 9:37 a.m., she carried digital copies and photographs. But one detail unsettled her most. The bank clerk, a middle-aged man with an unshakable stare, had said softly as she departed, "You are not the first family member to come asking about this box." Someone else came 2 weeks ago and didn't reply. But inside, her heart turned to ice. Diana had prepared her evidence with precision. But if someone else had already come looking, then the danger wasn't in the past. It was moving in the present and closing in on Anne. The surveillance begins. Within 10 days of Zurich, Anne noticed the first signs. Her personal phone, usually secure, developed faint echoes during calls. Mail arrived tampered, letters slit open and resealed. On October 3, 2024, her official car refused to start inside Clarence House's garage. Mechanics later claimed rodent damage, but Anne recognized the pattern. Someone wanted her unsettled, watched, vulnerable. She reached out to a retired MI5 director, an old ally of Diana's, who swept her residence. He found 3 listening devices hidden in her study and malware inside her encrypted tablet. The hunt had already begun. Late one evening, she returned to her quarters to find an envelope slipped beneath her door. Inside, just 6 words written in black ink. Stop digging or join her. No signature, no explanation. Anne clenched the note in her fist. The threat was clear, but she was not her mother, nor her brother. She had lived her life enduring pressure, never bending. Now she was ready to fight. A lead soon emerged. A package arrived at Sandringham addressed only to her initials. Inside was the name, Timothy Radcliffe, Diana's former private secretary. Anne remembered him well, quiet, loyal, and one of the few who disappeared from public life after 1997. She contacted him discreetly. They met at a chapel outside Bath at 11:45 p.m. by candlelight. His words were blunt. "Your sister-in-law wasn't paranoid. She was hunted." And some inside knew he confirmed that Diana had been working with whistleblowers and that parts of the official investigation into the crash were deliberately sealed. Timothy described missing CCTV footage from Paris, reports buried in archives, and witnesses silenced. He told Anne that Diana's final weeks were filled with fear about her breaks, her phone lines, even her own staff. The investigation wasn't meant to solve her death, he said flatly. It was meant to close it. Anne left the chapel with a truth she couldn't unhear. The warning note at her door wasn't an empty threat. She was now in the same shadow Diana had once stood in. The evidence was real, and the threats were real. But Anne also knew the network wasn't just hiding. It was striking. And the next blow wouldn't be against her. It would be against Diana's sons and their children. The network exposed. By November 2024, Anne had pieced together enough from Diana's files and Timothy's testimony to form a terrifying picture. This wasn't isolated corruption. It was a network, international, well-funded, and embedded inside royal foundations. Money meant for hospitals and landmine victims had been laundered into weapons deals, offshore trusts, and private estates. And chillingly, several signatures tied back to individuals still active in palace circles. One folder labeled Operation Marionette outlined cooperation between foreign contractors and a private UK security firm. The final page carried the line, "Ensure containment before Paris trip." Risk elevated, Anne's blood ran cold. The car crash had not been random. It had been staged. And the actors had never been caught. Worse still, many still moved freely in society, cloaked by respectability. Diana hadn't been reckless. She had been silenced. She confronted Timothy again at a farmhouse outside Oxford. Together, they compared documents. One grainy photograph stopped Anne in her tracks. It showed the Paris tunnel moments before impact. The infamous white Fiat was visible, but behind it was a second car, unreported, its plates linked to a security company with ties to a royal aide. It was confirmation, proof that the official narrative had been doctored. Diana's fears, once dismissed, were validated in full. Anne wept that night for the first time in years. Not in public, not in front of staff. Alone. She looked at Diana's smiling photos on her desk. "You were right," she whispered. "And we failed you." The evidence left her shaken, but also resolute. She knew what had to come next. The silence had to be broken. Diana's secrets were no longer whispers hidden in a box. They were evidence of betrayal, conspiracy, and calculated silence. And Anne understood. If she spoke now, she risked everything. But if she stayed silent, the same forces might destroy the next generation. The emotional breakdown. The weight of the discovery pressed down on Anne like a stone. On the night of December 2nd, 2024, she sat in her private study at Gatcombe Park, papers and photographs spread across the desk. One image haunted her. Diana, radiant in 1996, laughing at a children's hospital visit. Beside it, the grainy still from the Paris tunnel showing the second car. Two worlds, one truth. Diana had been hunted, not careless. Anne pressed her palms to her eyes, But the tears came anyway, steady, unstoppable. For decades, Anne had prided herself on restraint. She had endured scandals, divorces, and endless headlines without flinching. But this was different. This was family. She whispered aloud, "I should have asked her. I should have listened." Her memory flashed back to 1992, when she once dismissed Diana as too soft. Now, reading Diana's letters, she realized she had been wrong. Diana wasn't weak. She had been one of the strongest women in the palace, and she had stood alone. Anne pulled out one final note from the hidden compartment. Dated August 29, 1997, just one day before the crash, it read, "They will never stop until they own everything, even William and Harry. Please, protect them if I cannot." Anne clutched the page to her chest, sobbing quietly. Her tears weren't just grief, they were guilt. For years, she had believed Diana's warnings were dramatics, but now she knew they had been prophecy. At 1:12 a.m., her phone buzzed. Timothy's voice was urgent. There was an attempted breach at Lamrook School, Prince George's campus. Security stopped it. But Anne, it's starting again. The words cut like a blade. The network wasn't done. They were circling the next generation. The tears on Anne's cheeks dried. Her sorrow hardened into steel. She whispered, "Not this time. Not her sons. Not their children." Anne's grief had turned into resolve. What began as an investigation had become a personal war. And now, time was running out, because the network had already made its move. The race against time. On December 3rd, 2024, at 5:47 a.m., Anne summoned her trusted contacts. A retired MI5 director, 2 loyal security officers, and Timothy Radcliffe gathered in a safe house near London. On the table were flash drives, original documents from Zurich, and photocopies of Diana's handwritten notes. The plan was clear: protect William's children, expose the network, and cut off their reach before it spread further. Reports arrived by 8 a.m. An unregistered van had attempted to bypass security near Prince William's country home in Norfolk. Inside were blueprints of Kensington Palace, surveillance photos of Catherine, and even brake schematics for a staff vehicle. This wasn't random. It was targeted. A message that they were watching every move. Anne's jaw tightened. "Then let them watch me," she said, "because I am done being silent." Later that day, she confronted 2 senior royals at Clarence House, both names appearing in Diana's files. The meeting lasted 29 minutes. Anne's words were sharp. "You knew. You let it happen. And if anything happens to William, Harry, or their children, I will release every page." She placed a sealed envelope on the table, copies of bank transfers and signatures. Neither man spoke. Their silence was louder than guilt. At 9:02 p.m., as Catherine drove George and Charlotte home from school, their black SUV was forced off a narrow country road. The driver survived. The children were shaken but unhurt. Investigators later found deliberate tampering on a vehicle registered to palace staff. Anne stood at the crash site that night, surrounded by emergency lights, her hands trembling only slightly. She understood the message. They were willing to finish what they started in 1997. But she also understood something else. The network had just exposed itself. The attempt had failed, but it revealed the truth. Diana's enemies were still active. Anne knew she couldn't wait for the palace to act. She had to bring the evidence into the light herself. Diana's final victory. The morning of December 5th, 2024, Princess Anne stood before a podium inside a secure briefing room in Westminster. Cameras were rolling. Boxes of evidence, folders, and digital archives sat guarded by MI5 officers. Her voice was steady as she began, "For years, the world was told only part of the story of Diana, Princess of Wales. Today, you will hear the truth." The room fell silent. Anne presented documents tracing millions siphoned from charities between 1994 and 1997. She displayed photographs of Diana in secret meetings, transcripts of her recorded conversations, and the chilling note, "Ensure containment before Paris trip." For the first time, the monarchy itself was tied publicly to corruption and cover-up. Headlines erupted worldwide. By nightfall, 3 business magnates were arrested. By the next morning, 2 government officials resigned. A third fled the country. On December 6th, the Diana Truth Foundation was announced. Its mission: protect whistleblowers, safeguard charitable funds, and expose abuses hidden under prestige. Catherine and William stood by Anne during the launch, tears in their eyes as Diana's recorded voice played to the audience. "Don't carry fear. Carry courage." The nation wept. For the first time in decades, Diana was not remembered for scandal or tragedy, but for bravery. Anne returned to her quarters at 10:34 p.m. that night. On her desk sat the rosewood jewelry box, now empty except for one hidden slot. Inside was a small cassette labeled, "For William and Harry, only if the world finally hears me." She pressed play. Diana's voice filled the room, soft but steady. "My dear boys, if this reaches you, then truth has survived me. You are not symbols. You are hearts. Lead with courage, not crowns." Anne cried again, but this time her tears were not guilt. They were release. The truth had finally broken through decades of silence. But even after justice began, Anne knew the story wasn't finished. The jewelry box had revealed more than secrets. It had revealed a new legacy. Legacy of the jewelry box. By January 2025, the ripple effects were undeniable. Arrests continued. Offshore accounts were frozen. Investigations reopened in France, Switzerland, and the UK. For the monarchy, the revelation was devastating. But for the people, it was vindication. Diana's warnings had been true all along. She had not died in vain. Her courage had finally brought accountability. Anne became known quietly as the Sentinel. She gave few interviews, but her actions spoke louder than words. Catherine and William credited her with shielding their children. Harry, from California, released a statement praising his aunt for finally honoring Mom's voice. Public approval for Anne surged to 79%, the highest of her career. For once, she was not just the hardest-working royal. She was the bravest. The jewelry box itself was placed on display in the British Library under heavy guard. Visitors lined up daily to see the inscription, "For those who dare seek truth, DS." Flowers were left beside it. Notes reading, "We heard you, Diana." For thousands, it became a shrine, not of loss, but of justice. Diana's spirit, once silenced, was alive again through truth. On the evening of January 15, 2025, Anne sat alone, gazing at the cassette tape once more. Diana's words echoed in her mind. "Don't carry fear. Carry courage." She realized Her sister-in-law had never been her rival. She had been her teacher. And though Diana was gone, her voice now guided the monarchy's future. Anne wiped a tear, whispering, "I carried it for you, and I will keep carrying it." Diana's jewelry box wasn't treasure. It was testimony, a hidden chronicle of courage, betrayal, and sacrifice. Through Anne's hands, the world finally heard what had been buried since 1997. And in that revelation, Diana won her final victory. As the world now knows, that rosewood jewelry box wasn't a keepsake, it was a lifeline. Diana had hidden inside it not just jewels, but warnings, records, and her voice, preserved for those brave enough to look. For decades, her truth had been dismissed as rumor. But when Princess Anne opened that secret compartment and read Diana's final words, the silence of 1997 shattered forever. Anne's tears weren't weakness. They were recognition. For the first time, she saw Diana not as a rebel against tradition, but as a shield, protecting William, Harry, and even the monarchy itself from corruption that thrived in the shadows. In uncovering those letters, Anne did what no one else had dared. She gave Diana's truth a second life. Today, the jewelry box rests in the British Library, a symbol of courage disguised as inheritance. Visitors whisper beneath its glass case, reading the engraved words, "For those who dare seek truth." And they understand. Diana's fight was never about crowns or titles. It was about love, justice, and legacy. Through Anne's tears and through the revelation of that hidden box, Diana's voice finally triumphed. A princess silenced in life, but victorious in truth.